On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience 2444 with guest Andrew Wilson. The No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. This show where two podcasters with 164 hours of Joe Rogan Experience get to know Joe Rogan. That's 164 hours because we're actually releasing this episode a week earlier than planned for reasons that will become pretty obvious as to why we moved this one up the schedule. So you will see those numbers like that. So this is the show for anyone who is curious about Joe Rogan, his guests and their claims, as well as anyone who just wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence. And boy, do we see that here. I'm Michael Marshall. I am joined by Cecil Cicirello. Today, we're going to be covering Joe's January 28th, 2026 interview with Andrew Wilson. So, Cecil, how did Joe introduce Andrew in the show notes?
Andrew Wilson has participated in thousands of debates on political, cultural, and religious topics. He's the host of The Crucible and proprietor of its associated online school, Debate University.
Debate University. Okay. So is there anything else we should know about Andrew Wilson here?
I mean, as the description says, he's basically a Christian debate bro. He has now I saw a Politico article that suggests that he also does a show or is part of a show, at least the founding of a show, and it participates in a show called Whatever, which is like a red pill dating show with another person and a very large panel of people, often women. They host debates on that channel too, and it's often against young women. He also has this other show that they mentioned, The Crucible, which is a debate channel on YouTube. And he sells, like they say in the description, a course in Debate University. So the thing is called Debate University. You can join it for $249 for 5 years. So that's like an undergraduate degree with a year off. And you can also pay $49 a month for Discord access there for that Debate University. If you watch any of his clips, and I spent some time searching through some of the more popular clips I could find of him, I would describe his debate style as sort of a schoolyard bully. He name calls, raises his voice, tries to intimidate his opponent, and then does a lot of sneering and laughing when they respond.
Okay, so provoke someone into reaction, and then when they react, sort of point out, well, there you go, you haven't got an argument because you're getting all emotional and reacting. Okay, I know the sort of thing you mean. So what did they talk about here on this episode?
They talked about Charlie Kirk, Art Bell, wildlife conservation and hunting, debating people, spent a lot of time talking about that, communism, the left, how the murder of Alex Pretti was a really unfortunate series of events, and it's very, very nuanced, how Christianity is super great, and all Christians are wonderful and nice.
Okay, lovely stuff. So yeah, our main event this week, and the reason why we're doing this episode slightly out of our original recording schedule is because we're going to be talking all about that reaction to Alex Pretti's murder. Obviously, in a previous episode, we talked about how Joe discussed the murder of Renee Good and how the media were painting this as Joe is departing from Donald Trump, and we were arguing it was nothing of the sort when he sat down with Rand Paul. So seeing how he responds to another fatal shooting in the same town in a couple of weeks feels really, really relevant. We're also going to cover religiosity in the undercard. But before we get to either of those things, we need to say a huge thank you to our Area 51 All Access Pass patrons. Those are definitely an AI overlord, billionaire oligarchs, Ramtam Tickler, Stargazer 97, Stoned Banana, Darlene, Normal Names, Fred R. Gruthius, 11 Gruthius, Lucy Cortez, Morgan Gordon, Scott Laird, Carissa Gunderson, Angie Mackey, Matthew Cutler, autistic Twitch streamer, Dr. Andrew Gibson, the online physics tutor, Laura Williams, no, not that one, the other one, Cindy Lynch, yes, that's Cindy Lynch, Chunky Cat in Chicago has claws out, Blue Ridge True Crime Podcast, the unofficial No Rogan Complaints Department, Don't Thank Me, Your Show Is Just Worth Investment, and I Just Found Out Marsh Did COVID and I'm chuffed. And all I'll say that last one is, if you're chuffed about that, wait until you find out I'm in the Epstein files. which is a real thing.
Not in a bad way, though.
We'll talk about it sometime, I'm sure. They all subscribe to patreon.com/No Rogan. You can do that too. All patrons get early access to ad-free episodes. You also get a special patron-only bonus segment every single week. And this week, Joe and Andrew are going to try and educate me on what is going on in my country. So you can check that out at patreon.com/No Rogan. But now it is time for our main event.
It's time. It's just time.
So a huge thank you to this week's veteran voice of the podcast. That was Brad announcing our main event. Remember, you too, just like Brad, can be on the show. You just need to send us in a recording of you giving us your very best rendition of It's Time. You can send that to NoRoganPod@gmail.com. And remember to tell us how you want to be credited when we do that.
We sometimes talk about our biases before we get started, so I think it's important to talk about our biases. I am one of those people who thinks ICE and Border Patrol and the push by Department of Homeland Security is uncalled for and aggressive and pretty awful. And the things that they're doing are pretty terrible all across the United States, specifically in Minnesota. I also disagree that with the state just murdering people for protesting. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Just say that out loud, because much of what we're going to hear is exactly the opposite of what I just said. So I just want to say, I already am telling you I'm against all of that stuff.
It's interesting that you have to point out your bias against state-sponsored killing of innocent protesters. If only you had some sort of protection for the right to protest or the right to free speech. I will say, if we're stating our biases, as a member of the rest of the world who's looking on at your country with somewhat surprise, somewhat dismay, I don't know that I've met anybody outside of America who thinks what's happening with ICE in Minnesota is good or called for. And that may well be that the rest of the world is just categorically uninformed about the realities of what's really happening in America right now, or it might well be that the 7.5 or 6.5 billion people who don't live in America aren't subject to the influences that are making people think this is a good thing. So yeah, I agree. Killing Alex Pretti and Ray Good is a bad thing.
Okay, all right. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on. We're going to start with our first clip. This is talking about the protests and whether these protests are organic.
Yeah. I mean, we're watching these. I've been covering the riots nonstop. I'm sorry, protests. The completely organic protests, which are totally organic.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to watch. I was watching one the other day. We were live, and it was Don Lemon. And he had showed up in Minnesota, and most of the protesters saying, we're coming from out of town. We're from this state. I'm from 2 states away. I'm from 3 states away, for this totally organic protest.
So this is before we get into the actual full discussion of what's happening there, but already listen to the way that Andrew wants to frame this.
Yeah,
this is 20 minutes before we actually start talking about it. He's already trying to allege that these are riots rather than protests. So he says riots, sorry, protests, sorry, organic protests. He's trying to make out that these are protests that are staged, that these are orchestrated. These aren't natural responses or reasonable responses to what is happening with ICE in the city. This isn't just concerned citizens worried about their freedom and their rights. This is an orchestrated, non-organic riot or response. That's what he's trying to frame this as. And this will be the framing for the way they discuss this throughout the episode.
I would argue that the situation itself isn't organic. These are a response to an administration sending federal agents to a small state to intimidate the populace. So the response might be organic, but the initial sending of federal agents to a small state that has very few migrants to go after people that they claim are part of a fraud network, that is something that's on border control and is very targeted. It's a very targeted thing. That's not organic at all. But the response to it seems to be very organic. And it also doesn't matter where you're from. You can be from anywhere and dislike something is happening. So, I don't believe him when he says, oh, they're talking to these people and one person says this, they're from here, and one person says they're from far away. I don't want to, that's just random sample. So who cares? But you also don't have to be from where you are in order to protest. So people travel to Washington, D.C. often, and they will protest in Washington, D.C. That doesn't invalidate the protest. They just travel to protest. I would argue that someone who travels to protest has more skin in the game. They are more upset about those types of things. If people are coming from all across the country that are doing, say, protesting like a nuclear facility or something, and they have to travel to that nuclear facility, does that make that protest less valid, right? If they're protesting some sort of bomb site or something, some place where they're going to shoot bombs off, that doesn't make it less valid. You're trying to combine these two things as if because they're from far away, they're not genuine or they're paid or something. There's sort of an inference there that they're paid or there's no real skin in the game for these particular people.
Yeah, these are protests about people protecting their civil rights. So it doesn't matter that the civil rights infringements aren't happening on your very doorstep. If I started to see civil rights infringements in my country, I would go there to protest it. I live in Liverpool. If there were civil rights violations happening in Chester, I might get on the train to Chester to complain about that, because if someone's rights are eroded in Chester, there's nothing to stop my rights being eroded in Liverpool. That's kind of how we maintain our rights. So yeah, I would travel to Chester in order to protect civil rights if I saw abuses on the street. Manchester? Okay, maybe not. I live in Liverpool. Maybe I'd let Manchester fall. But other cities, I might try and defend.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Indiana. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. Okay, so now they're going to start talking. This is skipping forward and ahead, because that piece that we just played, by the way, we cut a tiny piece about Don Lemon out of that. They were just ragging on Don Lemon, and we cut it out.
Yeah, it wasn't important to the point that they were making.
You can go listen to it if you want, but we're literally just cutting them bagging on Don Lemon. But in any case, this next clip, they're talking about the murder of Alex Pretti, and this starts about 20 minutes after the previous clip.
I'm glad you're a gun guy, because I wanted to bring up this whole thing with this guy, Pretti.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked about it. We haven't done a podcast since that guy got killed. But that whole thing, there's a lot of people that don't understand what's going on, and why riots only in Minneapolis, and why riots in the place where there's an ungodly amount of fraud that has been discovered.
Coincidentally, right around the same time.
Exactly. Like instantaneously afterwards, the narrative completely changes. Everybody forgets about the fraud. Now all anybody cares about is ICE and fascists and Nazis.
Yeah.
And it's there's a, you know what a color revolution is?
Of course.
And for people that don't, it's a coordinated effort to cause chaos. And this is a very coordinated thing. The idea that this is an organic protest, these riots organic, is nonsense. It's provably nonsense, because now they have access to the Signal chats, so they know that these people.
Cam Higbee, by the way,
yes,
he's been on the front lines of this. The Crucible has been a big supporter of that effort. My channel. I will often snipe his coverage while it's going on, send my audience over to send in super chats in order to keep this guy going. I think that work is critical.
Yes.
It's critical work. And there's not that many people doing it anymore because of how dangerous it has become.
Yes.
And so I'm a big supporter of that. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he says politically, but what he's doing on the ground there needs to happen.
Right. You need to understand that this isn't organic, regardless of how you feel. I don't feel that guy should have been shot, but I understand what happened. And what happened was chaos.
So again, look at the framing here. And this is framing coming from Joe this time. So we've seen Andrew's framing. Now look at Joe's framing. He's making out that this is happening because of the fraud. The fraud was in the newspapers, and then instantaneously the narrative shifts to this. So this is all very much suggesting this is a deliberate attempt to distract from allegations of fraud in Minnesota. Now, I would point out that these protests happened instantaneously after ICE was deployed to the streets of Minnesota and started harassing people. So if your goal was to keep whatever alleged fraud that you think is happening in Minnesota in the newspapers, maybe don't send the troops into the streets, provoking a reaction from people as a protest in response.
Yeah.
It is not the protest. It wasn't fraud in the papers and then a protest and then ICE. That is not the order of operations here.
Right.
It was ICE and then the protests. That's the trigger here. And notice even Joe is calling this a color revolution. Like this is a deliberate attempt to undermine the government, to overturn the government, to install a different style of government. That's because they have to frame this as an illegitimate protest. They can't just accept or they can't believe or follow the idea that people are seeing armed, masked, anonymous agents on their street, stopping citizens, stopping immigrants, arresting people, disappearing people. They can't just accept that people are seeing that and are upset about it and are protesting it. They have to delegitimize it by tying it in with terms like non-organic protest, a color revolution, things like that.
The fraud claim that these agents are on the ground in Minnesota, I think it doesn't hold water. And the reason why is because you wouldn't be stopping cars in the middle of the street or going door to door or going to schools to pull kids out. Those types of things very specifically have nothing to do with fraud whatsoever. Yeah. That's just them doing a dragnet on a neighborhood, and they are literally stopping people indiscriminately that look a little brown. So that's not going after fraud. That's going after people if they think they are suspicious that they are not actually natural born citizens, and they actually go after people who have been naturalized. They go after people who are in the process of getting asylum. They go after people who are natural born citizens. It doesn't matter at all to them. They capture a ton of different people, and then they arrest them. So this sort of fraud claim to me doesn't hold a lot of water.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is just the distraction. That is just the false pretense on which to base these defenses of ICE. Because if you're looking to police fraud, you send someone in armed with a calculator, not a machine gun, not a handgun, not a rifle. That is how you police fraud. So this is really not related to fraud, and you can see the attempts that they're making to try and delegitimize this. By, as I said, pointing out, as we did previously, of people coming into the city to protest it, but lots of the locals are hating it as well. Lots of the locals are hating what ICE is doing to the city, but these men will ignore that because they'll say, look at the people who've come from outside in order to take part in these protests. If you're local and you're protesting ICE, these men don't want to acknowledge that you exist because this removes another of their pegs from their defense here. They're talking about Cam Higby's supposed exposés. They talk about how they support Cam Higby in his work there. I've put a couple of links to the Twitter thread he's posted about his expose of Signal chat. He's got into the Signal groups for some of the organizers. But if you read the expose, it's pretty clear that it's been taken out of context and exaggerated. So he says, for example, well, they must have a headquarters. He's making posting along the lines of like they must have a headquarters because here's one of the organizers talking about going back to their home base. Therefore, this must be highly organized and maybe even well funded. Well, it's either that or it's somebody who's out there protesting then saying, I'm going home, but just using a different way of talking about that. I'm heading back to my home base. I'll see you again tomorrow. It's not actually, he's taken these kind of things out of context to try and spin this into as sinister as he can. But actually, there's not a great deal here. And from Joe's talking about this, it is pretty clear that he's bought 100% of this. And I think that's because he was motivated to believe this. We saw that with his coverage of Rene Good. While the media said Joe's departing from Donald Trump by calling ICE Gestapo, when we covered the show, we found that most of that show was defense of ICE, apart from a very small snippet that went viral. And even that was some people think X and some people think Y. It wasn't a direct kind of thing. So Joe is already motivated to believe this. And now he's got this, he's gone looking in the intervening weeks for something to support his preconceived biases. And he's found this. And he's not the only one. His good friend Kash Patel, obviously been on the show. We've covered it from the FBI. This is a piece that's in The Guardian. We've got here Higby, which is Cam Higby, the person who's publishing this to Twitter. Higby pushed his disclosures on Benny Johnson's podcast, The Benny Show, where Johnson demanded a federal investigation. This is clearly a coordinated infrastructure, Benny Johnson said, and we'd like for the feds to take a crack at trying to get rid of this infrastructure the way they approach the mob or cartels or other terrorist networks, right? And then The Guardian reports Kash Patel himself then joined Benny Johnson's podcast, where he made frequent appearances before becoming FBI director and confirmed he would act as suggested. Patel said, as soon as Higby put that post out, I opened an investigation on it. So we see here how having someone on the ground infiltrating and taking things out of context is making it through people like Benny Johnson and Joe Rogan out to millions of people, and also to the head of the FBI, who then acts on that. So we have a very clear, coordinated effort to discredit and intimidate these protests. And I know last time when we talked about the Rene Good killing, I said that the positive praise that Joe was getting for saying that ICE were acting like Gestapo wouldn't be helping matters at all, because he just have someone on the show soon enough to ensure that he didn't waver from his support for Trump and for ICE. Yeah. And I think that's what this show is. Whether intentionally or not, Andrew Wilson, Joe has Andrew Wilson on here to make it clear where he stands, where Joe stands on what's happening in Minnesota.
Yeah. I think that this is very clear because he mentions it as well, and they mentioned it in the previous clip about these protests not being organic. I think this is trying to undermine any culpability of the current administration for the execution, right? So they're going to start with, these aren't organic protests, meaning the people there and the people in the United States cannot be that upset about what is actually happening. And that actually delegitimizes the whole thing because it's orchestrated by someone else. Someone else is orchestrating this thing. No one here can be this upset about it. This isn't real outrage. It's manufactured outrage. And that's and that's trying to undermine this execution. And they're going to do a lot of different things. They're going to be digging this foundation out the entire episode. They're going to be taking their shovel at little things throughout to try to make it seem like the people who murdered Alex Pretti aren't at fault. It's not their fault. Yeah. This also, too, I want to mention just, this Signal chat thing, because I did a little digging into the Signal chat thing, too. And really what it is a bunch of people on Signal are using Signal to communicate to each other license plates of cars, where the cars are, where they're going, and they're basically telling people where the border agents are so they can travel there, film them, blow whistles, protest, do all the things that are perfectly legal for them to do. And that they got infiltrated by this person who then posted them everywhere to try to make it seem like these things are organic. Well, just being coordinated doesn't mean it's not organic. You can coordinate after something happens. That's perfectly fine. People do it all the time. So again, they're trying to blur lines here to make it seem like, no, it's got to be something that is not that is orchestrated by somebody who's pulling strings like a puppet master, when it could just be people are like, hey, let's get on this Signal thing and tell each other where these people are so we can choose to go places in our city that is more coordinated and more targeted.
Yeah, because what's the alternative? Like, would they only accept it if the protesters were wandering around the city hoping to stumble across ICE? Is that the only legitimate form of protest? Because anything other than that, including, hey guys, let's all meet at the town square tonight, that's coordinated at that point. So would that be discredited too? Yeah.
Okay, so now they're going to try to describe the scene right before the killing. So they're talking about the video that circulated everywhere after Alex Pretti was murdered. They're talking about that video.
So what happened? First of all, it wasn't ICE. People need to understand that. It was Customs Border Patrol people. So they were brought in to assist ICE. And they're telling this lady to stand away. And then this cop gets very aggressive and shoves her. You have to understand the situation that they're in, right? And this is not making an excuse for any of it. But you have to just to put it into context. These people are getting harassed outside of any hotel they're at. People blow horns. They try to smash into the hotel.
They dox them.
That's why they're wearing masks. It's a coordinated effort. I'm not saying that guy should have shoved that guy. I don't think he should have. Or that woman. I don't think he should have. And then pepper sprayed. And then the guy who got shot, Pretti, he steps in, which is, if you know anything about concealed carry, if you are a concealed carry holder and you are carrying not just a pistol, but 2 full magazines as well, you do not ever physically engage with someone. You also are supposed to carry your license on you, and you're supposed to have ID on you. Mm-hmm. All right.
And you're trained specifically for this, by the way. I was a CPL instructor for years.
Okay. So you know about it all.
So yeah, Joe says, I'm not making excuses for ICE here. But then he says, but it wasn't ICE. It was technically a different agency. And they've been getting harassed so much, and people have blown their horns at them, and they've tried to dox them. This all sounds like you're making excuses for ICE. Those are
really
all excuses. Those are
Really
the
does.
excuses that the agencies have come up with. And okay, technically, it wasn't ICE, it was border control in this case, but that's somewhat splitting hairs because they've been deployed as part of the same mandate and the same deployment with the same mission as ICE. So it's not a gotcha to say, well, the masked and armed agent on the street that shot this man was from a slightly different jurisdiction from the one you're talking about. So what? So it's fine? Like, what is Joe's point here to bring up that it wasn't ICE?
Yeah, I think this is just a way to sort of get away from any criticism of this and push away by basically choosing to point out a very pedantic point, which is that was ICE. It wasn't ICE, it was Border Patrol. Okay, well, they were doing ICE work. It's not like they weren't doing it. It could have been an FBI agent. It could have been TSA out there. It doesn't matter. I also want to say, too, when people do this, they'll say things like, you know, this happens when people will talk about, say, an AR-15. They'll say, someone will say, well, you know, the assault rifle, AR-15, and they'll say AR means assault rifle. And people will correct them. No. AR means Armalite rifle. You don't know what you're talking about. Well, you don't need to know the serial number off a gun to be against guns, okay?
Yeah.
There's this sort of splitting of hairs, like you said, right? And that is a way to delegitimize the people who are talking about it, to say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. These people they don't even know who they're talking about in this situation. None of that stuff matters. It doesn't matter like what it says on their paycheck. Those people are all doing the same work, so it's okay to lump them together.
Yeah, exactly. And the other excuses that Joe brings up, oh, well, the agents, they were so harassed, people were blowing horns at them, blowing whistles at them. That isn't a justification to kill someone.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, even if you feel stressed by the situation of someone blowing their whistles and blowing horns, and you feel so stressed that you end up killing someone, that doesn't justify the killing. It actually says you should never have been in a position to have a gun under that kind of stress in the first place. You were never suited to that situation, because the response to somebody protesting at you, regardless how loud they blow their whistle, should never be to draw a gun and shoot them.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. You should, and we've seen that they're not training these people as deeply as they would for other types of deployments of law enforcement, right? So their training is fast, and they're obviously not trained enough, because these people who are coming in, either that or they're just bad at their job, right? That's also a possibility, because they could be on there for a long time. Some of these people could be Border Patrol agents for a really long time, and they're just bad at their job. But these people who are coming in, if they're upset by a little horn, they need to find other people who have a little more fortitude.
Yeah, exactly. Or if like they can't sleep at night because they're being harassed, there's too much noise around them at night. Well, this is the situation you're in. If you're policing a very legal protest, and people are protesting what you're doing because they see that as an infringement of civil liberties, this is the situation you're in. Joe says they're being doxxed. It's not that they're being doxxed; they're being identified. This isn't this isn't people going out of their way to say this is this person's family home and here's their family personal details. This is an employee of the state, an armed, masked, anonymous employee of the state who's involved in perpetrating violence on the public. They shouldn't be unidentifiable. That is the point. So identifying members of law enforcement is not doxing. That is making sure that you aren't being policed by an unaccountable force that is armed, that you have no recourse when they injure or worse people in the streets.
Now, he talks about concealed carry, right? So he says he had a concealed carry gun on him, and this person says, well, I was a concealed carry instructor for a long time. I just want to talk a little bit about that, because I am a concealed carry, I'm concealed carry legal in Illinois. So I have a card that allows me to carry a pistol on me as long as it's concealed to a myriad group of places in Illinois. There are some places I cannot carry it, and I have to know the law behind that, where I can and can't carry it. And in our state, you can't take it to a large gathering of people. In Minnesota, perfectly legal, by the way. So I looked at it the other day, and from what I saw, there was 12 states that say you cannot carry it to large gatherings like protests. But here, it's in Minnesota and in many other states, it's perfectly legal to do so.
Yeah.
So don't let them try to twist this to say what he was doing was illegal or he should have known better. What he was doing was perfectly legal. So carrying it there. Now, they also talk about how when you have a concealed carry, you don't physically engage with other people. I would argue that he didn't physically engage. He stood on the street and a Border Patrol officer came towards him and sprayed that person, and he inserted himself in between them. That's not engaging with the person. That's protecting the other person, and then they went after him. They threw him on the ground. They pepper sprayed him. So they attacked him. This is not the other way around. Again, this framing makes it seem like he leaped at them. He didn't do that at all. He was literally just standing there and then got assaulted by them. He was standing in between a person who they just assaulted. But again, that is not someone who is aggressively going after them. He's just inserting himself in between those two people. Whether or not he had a license on him also doesn't matter for the shooting, right? So whether or not he had his license on him or it was hidden or his ID wasn't on him, et cetera, I'm not sure what they found on him. I have no idea. The Border Patrol is reporting their own stuff here. I have no idea whether that was his gun, whether they didn't let any other independent people come in to take a look at this. These people are investigating this murder that they committed. So again, I'm not super sure what was on him and what wasn't on him, but I will say none of that matters before he gets shot. He gets shot. They didn't ask him for his gun. They didn't ask him for his license. They didn't ask him for any of those things. And just to say one real quick comment here, just at the end, he says, I was an instructor for years. You're trained for this. Let me tell you just really briefly, the training I took to get a concealed carry in Illinois, and Illinois is one of those states where getting a concealed carry in Illinois is supposed to be harder, at least from what I hear, than most other states. Our state doesn't like concealed carry, rightfully so. I don't like concealed carry, but our state doesn't like it. And so they make it a little more difficult for people. Supposedly the testing that we go through is a little more rigorous. I don't know if it's more rigorous in another state. I know it's a lot less rigorous around the country. Some states, you just need to be like, I would like to concealed carry today. And then you could just hide a gun on you. You don't need a license at all, okay? In our state, you do need a license. And the training consisted of a two-day workshop. And they do teach you about gun safety, about the situations in which you may or may not want to pull the gun. And then the only test you have, there's no written test, there's no quiz at the end of it. The only test you have is I have to shoot a target 15 times and hit it center mass at different distances from me. There is nothing else. I could literally spend the entire 16 hours on my phone and not paying attention to the instructor, and there's no way to know whether or not I heard those things. So when they say you're trained for this, understand it's a voluntary training put on by some random organization out there that's only certified by the state. And you don't necessarily even have to pay attention to it. The only testing afterwards is a shooting test. So don't let them think like there's a 2-year course you have to cover. It's 16 hours.
Yeah, it's not like you're trained to be James Bond or a sniper at this point.
Not at all. Although a lot of people in there do think they're both of those things.
Yeah, I imagine. I'll point out, because it's something we will come to through the rest of these clips. You said about how we don't know whether they found a license on him because Border Patrol are reporting themselves. We're relying on their own reporting of the thing that they did, which led to his death. Imagine then, that is absolutely true. But notice throughout this that Joe will not question their record of events at all, their version of events. And this is Joe Rogan. This is Joe Rogan, who thinks that the Kennedy assassination was misreported and misinvestigated because there was so many cover-ups about this bullet doing this and this bullet. Joe is so skeptical of the official narratives in any other situation. But in this time, I don't think in this whole interview, he raises a single doubt over what's being reported by the government agencies here. And it's Joe Rogan we're talking about. That
and it's really important. what's really important to point out about that's a great point, Marsh. But what also is important to point out is we saw them while the video was circulating online, literally lie about what happens in a video you could watch with your own eyes. So it's not like they have an amazing track record. They were saying he brandished a weapon towards them. And if you watch this video, there is no moment where Alex Pretti does that. So they lied while that video was out in the public and people had access to it. And it was literally flying across the internet. So if they're willing to lie about something you already at home have evidence of, what are they willing to lie about otherwise? I have no idea. I find it very difficult to trust this organization to report on themselves.
Yeah. And as we'll see, Joe doesn't.
Okay. So the next bit is where they talk about the kind of ammo and what he had on hand.
And in this particular instance, this guy clearly had been very involved. I don't know if he was a part of the signal chats, but when you go to what's supposed to be a peaceful protest and you're fully armed like that with 2 magazines, it's kind of crazy, right? Like, why do you need so many bullets?
Now the libs are all pro Second Amendment too.
That is wild. That's absolutely wild, which I'm for.
He had every right. He didn't last month, but okay.
I like it. I like where it's going. Sure. I like that because that's kind of a trap.
Yeah, he does like that because it's kind of a trap. They're trying to trap people in hypocrisy. So we'll sidestep that trap. I'm against your Second Amendment.
Yep, I am too.
I don't think anyone should be armed. I don't think Alex Pretti should have been armed. I also don't think the ICE officers and the Border Patrol officers who are walking around the streets and have now killed 2 people with their guns, I don't believe they should be armed. The vast majority of police in my country never touch a gun, and we don't have people dying in the streets who are innocent at the hands of the police certainly not in anywhere near the numbers that we're seeing in America. The point that people are making about that Second Amendment thing isn't that the Second Amendment is now lovely and wonderful and everyone should support it. It's that he did things what were meant to be the right and legal way. The way that Second Amendment organizations and supporters have always said that is fine and legal to do. Kyle Rittenhouse turning up at a protest with a gun, fine and legal. You're allowed to do that, Second Amendment. He did things the right way, and now you're using that as the reason he got killed. Yeah. So it's not that everybody on the left of America has suddenly become these hypocritical fans of the Second Amendment. That's not the case at all. That's the trap they're trying to set, but that is not true. What it is that even if you don't think the Second Amendment should be there, the people who do believe in the Second Amendment apparently don't believe in it for Alex Pretti now he's dead.
Earlier in the episode, they were calling them riots, and now they're saying he's showing up to these protests with this gun. And I think there's a real... I've heard that language in other places, and I think there's sort of a strategy here to make it seem like he was showing up to a large gathering of people with a gun. If you watch these videos, this is not a huge gathering of people. This is a few people on the street and a few ICE officers. There's maybe, 30 people total on the street? And that's if you're being generous and counting. I mean, I've watched these videos multiple times. This is not a huge crowd of people. The street is not packed with people. There's not protest signs everywhere. This is a very specific group of people who were blowing whistles, following ICE, using their cameras, or ICE or Border Patrol. That's splitting hairs. We talked about it earlier, but you know what I mean. They're following the ICE activity, right, with their cameras and with their phones, and they're out in the middle of the street, and they're doing it very specifically to make sure that other people know in the area that they are in the area, so that they should protect themselves against these illegal searches that they are doing, and these illegal these sort of targeted searches of these areas. Perfectly legal to do, and there wasn't a lot of people out there. And I think that that's very specifically using language to cloud what is happening here. Again, it's perfectly legal for him to take it to a protest, but it's also something that I think the framing of it makes it seem like even if it was legal, he was a little negligent is what they're sort of saying. And I don't think that that's the case. I think this is a person who was out doing this work, and He's allowed to carry a gun. Just like you, I don't think we should have surprise guns in the United States. I think surprise guns are real bad. I think that a lot of people get murdered because of surprise guns, and they get murdered by the state because of surprise guns. Because the state is not built to handle a surprise gun. It's a bad idea. We probably shouldn't have it. But genuinely, if he's following all the rules and you guys love it all the time, why don't you love it here?
Yeah. And I will say as well, they're talking about how all of the left now are hypocrites about the Second Amendment. We're now in a position where a lot of the right in America appear to be hypocrites on both the Second and First Amendment. Because they don't think he should be carrying a gun, and they don't think he had a right to protest. And those are pretty high up in your list of amendments, I'm led to believe.
Yeah. Okay, so now they're going to shift just for a second to talk about a manipulated photo of Alex Pretti.
Did you see what MSNBC did to his image?
Yeah. Where they gussied
Basically
it up.
Did the opposite of what CNN did to me. You know, CNN during the COVID times turned me green, and they made me ugly and look like I was dying, and they made him handsome.
Yeah.
So people would be more sympathetic to him getting shot, which is kind of wild. Like, are ugly people less valuable to MSNBC?
Less marketable?
That is crazy to me.
This is true. They did alter the photo. There's a quote here from Snopes. A spokesperson for the parent company told Snopes that the network obtained the image from the internet without knowledge of someone had altered it, and said the network didn't enhance the photo themselves. So they found it on the internet and they used the one that they found.
Yeah, and look, Joe has got a point here. We need to give Joe credit where it's due. He's got a point he's got a point in calling this out as weird. And honestly, CNN have fucked up here. Now, I can understand how they fucked up. Things are moving quickly. The guy just got shot. There's so much kind of going on. They didn't take the time to compare the photo they have of a guy they'd never seen before to another photo of that guy to see whether this photo had been digitally manipulated before they published it. I can understand how that would happen, but it is still a fuck up by the news, and we kind of have to point at that. But I think it's wrong to think that this is deliberate, because if this was true, if Joe's right that they deliberately did this, does Joe think they manipulate other victims to make them more attractive?
Right.
Because if not, why this time?
Yeah.
So Joe is saying, well, look, they mucked around with this picture for reasons. But like, for that to be true, they would either have had to choose this as a one-off and hope that no one notices, or they have to be routinely doing this and no one has noticed, and neither of those seem like reality. So I think this is way more likely to be explained by just a mistake. But this is an illustration of why it is so important that credible news organizations do their due diligence. Because sloppy errors like this will be pounced on by people looking to discredit and dismiss them, even if there's no coherent logic to that dismissal. Joe thinks this is deliberate, and he thinks the color grading that was done to the photo of him was also deliberate to discredit him, and he no longer trusts CNN, and nor do the guests that he has on the show, and nor do, I imagine, a lot of his viewers who've seen this repeated so many times. I will point out, we did get an email from someone who highlighted some of the technical details of what might have gone on with Joe's picture on CNN. We'll cover that in a future show when we do an errata in the wrap-up. But I want to say thank you to the person who sent that in with some technical details, and we will actually cover that in the future. But yeah, we got that, and that was really insightful.
You know, one of the things, too, is it also leads into more of this conspiracy idea about how these protests are conspiracy, right? Mm. They're not organic. There's a group of people who are orchestrating it. They are also, in Joe's mind, manipulating the media in order to get people to change their minds about these things. All these things feed into, did this person deserve to die? Well, he wouldn't have if they didn't try to manipulate this photo. Well, they did. They wouldn't have if they... And so there's all this back and forth. It wouldn't if it wasn't coordinated. And I think, you know, that sort of thing is just feeding this conspiracy mindset of him about how these aren't coordinated and how they're being orchestrated. This is another piece in that puzzle.
Yeah, that coordination's key, because either the people who are coordinating these protests manipulated the media, or the media is in consort with them to get to get the outcome that they want.
Yeah. All right. So they're going to mention Tim Walz here because they are connecting these protests to him.
The thing is like, this doesn't surprise me. By the way, this is what's going on, and this is a well-orchestrated, well-crafted thing. Yeah. And the signal chats prove that, but we knew it anyway.
Yes. Just involving government, by the way.
Yes.
Allegedly, at least, involving Minnesota state government.
Well, it involves Waltz.
Yes.
So that's not alleged.
Right. That's not alleged.
It's not alleged that it involves Waltz. It's not alleged that it involves Frey.
Right.
And it's not alleged. Well, what is alleged is the allegations of fraud, of course. But
there would be a reason why you would want to distract from all that fraud.
Sure.
And that would motivate you to do something along these lines.
To do what along these lines, Joe? That's the question. This is the pair of them working to delegitimize all of the protests. That's what this is. These aren't real protests. They're orchestrated. They're crafted. They're an attempt by local government to hide fraud, to distract from fraud. What they aren't, if you're to believe Joe on this, is a reasonable response to the actions of ICE on the streets.
Right.
But when he says that you would do something along these lines, he's missing the fact that these protests came after ICE were deployed to the streets of Minnesota. So this is a reasonable response to that, but not if you believe Joe. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, especially his viewers, his listeners, do believe Joe on this, and they will accept this version of reality from him.
So this next bit, this is going to be a bunch of clips in a row here. And we're starting with what Joe saw, and he's going to describe the scene to the listener about his perception of what happened right before Alex Pretti was murdered.
So, again, I don't think this guy should have pushed that lady. I mean, the way he did it was very violent. She was a small woman, and he shoved her very violently to the ground. Then this other guy, Pretti, gets in between them. Okay, which, again, if you are a concealed carry holder, is a giant no-no. You do not fucking do that. You do not engage with law enforcement when you're armed. You shouldn't engage with anyone. Ever. I mean,
you should be trained to avoid conflict.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. Is like, if you're armed, you move into that next level of, you need to really be avoiding conflict. You're not supposed to be in bars drinking.
Exactly.
You're not supposed to be, at big parties and things like this where violent things can occur.
Exactly.
You can take it to church, defend the church. Other than that, like, you're supposed to be avoiding conflict.
Exactly. So he gets in between the officer and this woman, puts his hands on the officer, and then he gets pepper sprayed. They go to the ground. There's a lot of scrambling going on. Now, you have to understand what happens when you get pepper sprayed, okay? I've never been pepper sprayed, but I did get tear gassed once during Fear Factor. It's pretty brutal, but
it's painful.
Yeah, it sucks.
And you can't breathe.
You can't breathe. Your eyes swell up. Your nose starts running like crazy. Yeah.
And that shit stays on your clothes.
You don't think well when that happens. So this guy's clearly not thinking well, and he can't see, and he's, and then they're on him, right? So they're on him.
Look at how they're framing this. The agents, they violently threw a woman to the ground. And then all Alex did was stand between them. And they're saying he was engaging with law enforcement. Listen to the language that they're saying, right? Law enforcement came after that person. He stood in between, and then they came after him. That's what happened. The aggressors here, the people who are the ones that are aggressive in this conflict, that's the agents. That's the agents of the government. It's not the people who were being attacked by the government, pepper sprayed and thrown to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I suspect what this is Joe thinking he is responding in a nuanced manner here. Not everything is black and white. Not everything is straightforward. There's a lot of complications in here. There's a lot of nuances. We've heard him talk about this as he's trying to wrestle in his mind. He's genuinely trying to make sense of this without changing his beliefs too much. And so this is his nuance. On the one side, well, people are saying Pretti was a domestic terrorist who came at the ICE agents in order to cause maximum damage, or was there and he shouldn't have been there and was trying to engage. On the other side, you've got a lot of people saying, well, ICE and Border Patrol are thugs who executed this guy. And so in the middle, offering a reasoned, nuanced response is Joe Rogan, who thinks, yes, that agent who was pushing the lady, that was violent, but then Pretti was an armed part of a well-orchestrated and well-funded fake protest, and that's why this happened. These two forces kind of met.
Yeah.
And Joe ends this by pointing out how the pepper spray means that Pretti wouldn't have been thinking well. You've got this guy who now isn't thinking well, as if it's his behavior that needs to be explained from the moment he gets pepper sprayed. Now, bear in mind when you watch the footage, and unfortunately we all have now, there were 6 or 7 Border Patrol agents involved, including the one who disarmed him, who took Pretti's gun off him in the midst of this scramble. And by scramble as well, to be clear, Pretti doesn't reach for his gun. They pull the gun out of his clothing. Then there's the one who punched him at least 3 times after that while he was on the ground, and the ones who shot him. Were all of them thinking clearly? Because Joe doesn't offer any opinion on that. He doesn't even mention them. They just have Alex Pretti was tear gassed, he was pepper sprayed, and now he's not thinking clearly. It's not his thoughts that we need to clarify here.
Well, they might have got a bad night's sleep, like he said, because
that is true. It was so loud with those whistles.
So, gosh, it could be, that is something. I wind up getting a bad night's sleep sometimes, and then I just murder somebody in the morning. I'm just so angry.
Before you don't talk to me before I've had my first coffee, or I may shoot you in the street with 6 of my buddies.
Especially if I heard a horn during the middle of the night. Man, am I angry. Oh, I'm so mad. I think the real issue here is that they're normalizing the brutality that has no other cause than the border agent, right? The border agent, and they're annoyed. They're mad at this person. That's the cause. If you watch this person is upset, and they is upset because of contempt of cop, right? This person is disobeying me. And we've sort of pushed the Overton window in this country so far where we are now thinking that someone who disobeys the police should be attacked with a chemical irritant, thrown to the ground, and we think that's perfectly normal. That is not normal. That's not good. That's not even remotely normal. It's something that we should be revolting against. Very specifically, you should be out in the streets protesting against it, which is what they were doing. So this whole idea that he's coming up with, he's like, well, you shouldn't have inserted yourself. This person is aggressively going after the woman and going after Alex Pretti, and no blame whatsoever. It's not even remotely their fault.
Well, I mean, you talk about blame. We've blamed the government and we've blamed Tim Walz. We've blamed the well-funded, well-orchestrated protests. We have blamed Alex Pretti for carrying a gun. We've blamed him for his behavior if he got tear gassed. Is there anyone else in this? Anything else we could be blaming here? Is there anything else we could blame? Let's see if Joe can find something else to blame.
Let's play the next clip, Marsh.
And then one guy, whether he yells out he's got a gun or grabs the gun first, I'm not sure. But there he has a gun. So they see his gun in the middle of the scramble. The guy pulls his gun out and moves off. Now this is where it gets weird. I believe the gun was a SIG P320. A SIG P320 is known for having accidental discharges. It has a reputation for it. It has a very specific type of striker. It doesn't have a safety the way some other guns do, and you can have negligent discharges with SIGs. As of 2017, SIG changed the way they make their guns, because the trigger itself was heavier than what it is now. And not just the pull, but the actual mechanism of the trigger was heavier. If you drop it, so if this is the barrel of the gun where the bullet comes out, and this is where you're holding on your hand, if you drop it, it'll discharge. And it'll discharge without moving the slide, which is kind of crazy. Because what happens is something in the dropping it on the back where the handle is
releases the disconnector. Probably
it causes that heavier trigger, the heavier weight to the trigger, to drop down, and it will discharge.
Okay.
As of 2017, they made the trigger lighter, and it doesn't do that anymore.
Okay, so I cut a tiny piece of this clip. They are talking, and they do an internet search very quickly about the trigger on the SIG P320. It's not necessary. You can listen to it if you want. The piece we cut starts at around 57:08. But like I say, it's just them talking about
it's like a minute and a half
trigger.
Or so of them trying to find it on the internet. Yeah.
It's not really necessary. But one thing that they neglect to mention here is that he's thrown to the ground, and then he's surrounded by agents, like Marsh said. They start beating him. They're using a pepper spray canister actually to smack him in the face with it. And then the entire scuffle, I watched this a couple times. The entire scuffle, as from my sort of rudimentary counting, from the time he gets thrown on the ground till the first shot into his back is 14 seconds. They never gave him a chance to comply. He's never given clear orders. Someone hears gun, I think. This is what I think happens, because I think someone screams gun because you can see someone running away with a gun and the person kills him. I can't be sure exactly why that person pulled his gun out and shot him, but it probably has something to do with either hearing gun or looking over and seeing there was a gun and then reacting to the fact that there's a gun there.
Yeah. And look, the way that Joe is describing it is just not accurate at all, as you say. If you listen to just this version of it, he's making out like Pretti said he had the gun, or Pretti pulled the gun, or someone grabbed the gun, and that's what sparked things off. But that isn't true. At no point does Pretti go to use his gun. As far as we can tell in the video, in any of the footage, he doesn't even touch his gun. Agents drag him to the ground after they pepper sprayed him, and then one agent takes his gun away and walks away with it, while at the same time another is beating him up. And the one who punched him or hits him with the pepper spray can, he's the one who actually draws his gun on him while he's on the ground unarmed, as the other agents back away. Maybe because someone has shouted gun. Maybe they've shouted, I've got his gun, because they did take his gun off him at this point. He's unarmed. Yeah. Then they fire 10 times while he's prone on the ground. That's what's happened. But now, Joe is working so hard to exonerate these agents that he's now speculatively blaming the gun. It's the gun's fault. The gun must have it's got a weak trigger. The gun must have gone off. And this happened weeks after different agents shot someone else on the streets in the same city. That wasn't a misfire either. And I think that the reason to make this point then is, ask yourself, what would it take for Joe to blame ICE or Border Patrol for a killing?
Yeah.
We've got 2 shootings filmed from multiple angles, both of which involve victims who did not in any way try and injure the agents involved. And he is still working this hard to exonerate the government agents who did these killings. Yeah. That is a sign of where Joe's loyalties are lying here, and where his leanings, his biases are leading him.
They also say, well, the gun went off, or the gun went off. They're saying that the gun went off, or maybe they're speculating about it. I don't think that that's relevant to this really at all. A gun going off when someone shoots a gun nearby should not, your first reaction to that should not be, I will pull my gun out and just start unloading in the person in front of me. That shouldn't be, if that's your reaction, you're not a trained person who should have a gun. Yeah. They're trying to heap all this blame on Alex Pretti. He's trained. He should have been trained in this. He should have been trained. And I didn't hear them mention the training of the Border Patrol. Not a single time. Not a single time in this episode. They're heaping all this on him like it's his responsibility. It's not his responsibility. He is surrounded by people with guns, and you're saying nothing about that. What you are saying is it's his responsibility for bringing a gun that may misfire into this situation. It doesn't matter if it misfires. If it misfires, it's not in front of you, and you're literally looking down. If you're some kind of fainting goat that when something happens, you faint, right? Or you freak out when it happens, you shouldn't be in charge of this situation. You shouldn't be the authority in this situation. You're bad at your job. And that's just me being as nice as possible to you right now. You are bad at your job. Stop doing your job. You just murdered someone because you heard a gunshot somewhere else.
I wonder as well what element is in this of the anonymity of the Border Patrol agents. We aren't discussing their motives. We aren't speculating as to their training, because we don't know. Certainly at the time that Joe's showing out, we know nothing about them, and that's because they are masked, anonymous forces on the street. So you can't say, well, what about this guy? What was his background? What was his training? Because they're masked and anonymous. And that is an argument against them being unidentifiable. Because Alex Pretti, we know his face, we know his name, we've got a story for him. And when you have a story with a person, you have a persona, you can start to interrogate that person as a real person, interrogate who they were in that situation. You can't do that with a faceless Border Patrol agent who could be any one of the hundreds or thousands who are out on the street at the time. So this is the danger of anonymous troops, anonymous armed agents on the street.
This next clip, there is a continuation, and they're still talking about the gun going off.
Right.
So in this case, I'm going to assume it for a second. So the gun drops on the side, striker fired. Let's say I don't know what the mechanism is. But let's say the disconnector. That makes the disconnector go. The hammer drops. Bam, it hits the primer. Gun fires.
Gun fires, hits the ground. These guys think, they hear gun. These guys think this guy might have a gun in the scramble. They don't know. This is all seconds.
So they open fire.
High pressure. They open fire on him. That's what I believe happened. So when people say, oh, they straight up executed this guy,
I think you better, there's a little more nuance.
There's more nuance to it. There's chaos. There's the fog of chaos. You're in the middle of this like very high stress situation where you've already pepper sprayed this guy. Now you're in a physical scramble. Someone says he has a gun. Gun goes off. Bang, bang, bang. You're just shooting. I'm assuming. This is just a lot of guesswork.
But that's a lot of bad stuff that has to happen in sequence.
So, yeah, it is a lot of guesswork. It is a lot of assumptions. But maybe ask yourself why Joe Rogan is making this many guesses and assumptions, and why all of his guesses and assumptions exonerate the Border Patrol agents.
Great
None
point.
of his guesses and his assumptions in any way cast any blame at all on them. And I think this is, it's a very nuanced situation. He's saying this is that thing of, well, everybody's reacting so emotionally. So if I just if I say this is nuanced, if I take a step back and say, well, it's so nuanced, who can really know? I'm going to look like the super smart, galaxy-brained, unemotional, hyper-rational person in here. But maybe what you're doing is you're allowing your own emotions to override the evidence you can see with your eyes. This isn't a sign of a lack of bias. This is a sign of an abundance of bias that you're blind to. Ask yourself, how often does Joe Rogan's assumptions and guesses in any way give this level of benefit of the doubt to the people he happens to dislike? And how often the people he dislikes happen to be on the left. We see this all the time. He jumps straight to assumptions about people he dislikes and assumptions of their fault and their guilt and their blame. But here, he's assuming none of the fault or guilt or blame is on the agents.
Yeah.
That should tell you where Joe's loyalties are lying here.
It's important to point out when they shot him, he was essentially prone on the ground.
Yeah.
He is, at that point, his hands and knees, so his knees are on the ground and both his hands are on the ground. And he's essentially just sitting on the ground face down. So he is shot in the back when that happens. I don't know what they're thinking is happening or what the people around them, or how you could so easily exonerate the people who are around him, who are supposed to be in control of that situation, for shooting someone who is prone and on the ground. But they very easily fly right past that and say, well, they might have heard a gun. Well, what if a firework went off? What if someone was throwing fireworks at the time? What if a car backfires at the time? Is that a legal reason why someone might be afraid and shoot somebody? They're already saying he didn't have the gun. They're saying the gun is outside, which you can clearly see from the video. There is no gun in his hands. But now they're saying, well, it could have just been a loud sound, and they're allowed to shoot you if you have a loud sound. Let me tell you, this is bad. This is really, really bad, because this is apologizing for the state for murdering a citizen. And they're not taking any action about it at all. And it literally doesn't even cross their mind that it is even remotely the fault of the person who did the actual murder.
Yeah, exactly. You say, what if a firework went off, or what if a car backfired? What if one of the other agents shot somebody else? There's a lot of agents walking around with guns.
Absolutely right.
Is that how you react to hearing a shot when your guys are walking around with guns? It's not great.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at your target, and when you hear a shot, you just pull your gun out and start shooting. This also doesn't take into account that once he was shot, another agent pulls his gun out and fires his gun into a prone. Now, at this point, Alex is face down on the pavement, not moving, and they unload their clips on him. So, I don't know how you justify the first bullet, but how the hell are you justifying the 9th and 10th bullet?
Yeah, and I don't know whether we'll get to see their body cam footage. What I hope is we don't get to hear them say fucking bitch like they did when they did the same thing to Renee Good.
All right, so next up, they have more theories on guns.
Now, here's the question. Was there something touching the trigger? Was it the holster bad? Was there debris in it? Was there something? Was his shirt touching it? Did he jam the gun in the holster and maybe like his shirt got stuck in and it touched the trigger a little bit?
There's also the second gun theory.
And then he moves forward. If the guy had a second gun.
There's also the second gun theory.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying, and maybe it met all of the conditions for that. It does seem unlikely to me, but it's possible that he's just holding it and it just happens to go off.
It would seem unlikely with any other gun.
Yeah.
So if the guy had a Glock.
But both of these cases are from the holster. This guy's grabbing from the holster. He's grabbing from the holster. Well, the cop had already pulled it out of the holster, and now he's holding it, and then it goes off.
Right, but it's so low resolution, it's hard to see what's going on with his hands. So if there had been some funkiness with the trigger, who knows where he got the gun? Who knows whether or not that gun had an aftermarket trigger? Who knows what's going on? But as he's doing this, you're in the middle of the chaos. You're ramped up with adrenaline. Who knows if that guy accidentally, while he was holding it, put pressure on the slide and caused that gun to negligent discharge? I don't know. This is the speculation, and the reason why the speculation is so this is something worth talking about.
It is worth talking about, Joe, but I don't think all the speculation you're putting in this is absolutely worth talking about. You've now created a second gun. This is something that you're talking about. You're talking about they're spending so much time trying to talk about all the different ways in which there could be another gun there or it's shot. We don't even know if it's shot. We're not even sure at this point in the investigation if it's shot. And so they're spending a lot of time on that. And then they're spending time talking about the gun and how it works, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff is not super useful because it's all just speculation anyway, and it's all speculation leaning towards exonerating the state. And I think it's important to take a look at the actual report. I'll link it. This is a CBS that's summarizing the report. I'll read a short part of it. It said, Pretti resisted CPB's personnel's efforts and a struggle ensued. During the struggle, a BPA yelled, "He's got a gun," multiple times, the report said. Approximately 5 seconds later, a Border Patrol agent discharged his Glock, and another Border Patrol agent discharged a different type of Glock at him. After the shooting, BPA advised he had possession of his firearm. So after the shooting is when they find out they have possession of that firearm. So in their own report, supposedly they heard he's got a gun, and that's why they shot.
Yeah, but even the amount of work they're doing to exonerate this, you have Andrew Wilson raising the possibility that there was a potential second gun, that Pretti had a second gun while he was prone on the ground? Or are they suggesting there's a second gunman behind the icy knoll? Like, what are we talking about here?
Right.
Anything to avoid the reality of what we were seeing.
So we worked our way through. There's, Joe thinking he's being nuanced about this. Now we get to Andrew's part where he's gonna talk about this, and he's gonna bring it into a different light.
Clear.
And the thing that's interesting about this is I'm even willing to kind of grant it to the left, just on appearance alone for a second, just for the sake of like logically taking this to its conclusion. Let's say that the cops were totally wrong on this. They messed the whole thing up. They screwed it up. It was a negligent discharge from the officer himself. It killed this guy. It was totally unjustified. Okay, but now what? Right? Is it the case that we're going to stop deporting illegal immigrants? We're going to stop, that ICE is going to stop, Border Patrol is going to stop doing its job. ICE is going to stop doing its job because of a single incident, even if all of the officers involved were incorrect? Of course not. That's ridiculous, right? The thing about this incident is it's being used as a catalyst to now say they're the Gestapo, just like they were trying to do with Renee. They're the Gestapo. They're here to be the jackbooted thugs of the Trump administration. That's being used now as the new rallying cry and catalyst and it's post hoc justification. That's what makes me so angry about it. It's like, no. You were out here doing all of this long before anybody was getting shot by ICE. Okay. You were doing this long before there was any supposed abuses by ICE. It seems like what they do is they set up the reactions, right? They set up the conditions, maximize the conditions for horrible actions to happen. And then when they do, they use those as the justification for why they were ever out there in the first place. And it's like, what's going on here? That's what bothers me.
Right. This is the quintessential description of the color revolution. I mean, they're trying to create chaos. And it's very well funded and very well organized. It's not as simple as this is an organic protest that people are fired up because ICE is in their community. That's not really what's going on.
At all.
But I think there's a lot of good people that are wrapped up in that think they're doing a good thing. And they really do think they're fighting fascism because they exist in these bubbles. And they're
I believe them.
So this, I think, is genuinely sinister. So you have Andrew saying, let's have a hypothetical. Let's say the left or right and that Border Patrol agents did kill this guy. That's not going to stop ICE doing anything. We're not going to stop doing ICE. We're not going to stop Border Patrol. He even says this single incident, both of those single incidents.
Both the incidents you mentioned.
Yeah, there's been two. This, I think, goes, if I was to be charitable, I would say this is stupid. I think, unfortunately, this is so far beyond stupid that it's hard not to see this as disingenuous. His argument here is, if you're on the street saying that ICE are behaving like fascists, and then ICE kills someone, and you say ICE killing someone is proof that they're behaving like fascists, Andrew can dismiss that because you were protesting before anyone got shot.
Yeah.
In fact, he's blaming the protests for deliberately pushing this in order to get someone shot, and we will hear about that again in another clip. But this, when you look at this logic, he says this is post hoc rationalization. It isn't. They were saying before the shooting was happening, this is fascist behavior and this is an infringement of civil liberties. And this is the kind of thing that leads to get people getting shot on the street, and someone got shot on the street. But what he's doing here, his line of arguing, is a license for any forces like Border Patrol or ICE or anything else like that to escalate once they're met with any protest and opposition. Because at that point, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah, right.
And if anything, it might be worse because the logic he's determined here, the logic he's outlining, might actually be encouragement towards escalation. Because if you don't do something that can be used to discredit the protest, the protest might seem genuinely legitimate. If these people are saying that you're fascists and you don't shoot someone and then say, well, you were protesting before I shot him, therefore your protest isn't legitimate, it might seem like they have a point. So he's building in not just an excuse for escalation, but almost a permission structure for escalation and an encouragement to escalation. This is genuinely sinister. And Joe agrees with every bit of it. Joe agrees with this analysis. I don't know that Joe sees the sinister side of it. I think he just sees this at what he thinks is face value, because he thinks this protest was orchestrated, was organized, was not organic, was well-funded even. And I would love to know what he means by well-funded, because Signal is a free app and whistles don't cost much. I don't know what funding you think is going on here.
Yeah.
You say people are coming in from out of state, unless you're thinking that there is some shadowy, rich person paying people to come in from out of state. There isn't funding going on here. But Joe is accepting all of this, that it's this orchestrated, well-funded attempt to make situations like this happen in order to justify the protest against them. This is deeply sinister, in my opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Marsh. I think that this whole piece where he's trying to make it seem like, well, let me break it down logically, and then he goes out to say, well, they're using this post hoc rationalization of this murder of Alex Pretti to say they're fascists, and then he goes on to say, but they murdered someone a week before. Well, what was Alex Pretti out there protesting then? Was that, and also that also doesn't take into account all the regulations and rules and laws that Border Patrol and ICE have been breaking in order to capture people. And then we're shipping people off to other countries. We're going to their immigration hearings and taking them. We're taking kids out of school. You're taking American citizens, people who've been here for a long time that aren't violent. All those different things that were not happening under other administrations are happening here. And they're saying, this is fascist. He's saying all that stuff is fine. Well, that's what people were protesting initially. He's obfuscating to say there's nothing to be protesting about, or he's completely ignorant over the reasons why those people were out there in the first place. Next bit, deportations.
Yeah. I do believe them that they think that they're fighting against fascism. And I've debated with enough of these people on what historically fascism is in comparison to what they perceive it as. that I do think that they believe that 100%.
Right.
I just think it's an unjustified belief, and I think it's ridiculous. But
It's not accurate.
It's not accurate.
You know, one of the things that we went over the other day is we talked about the deportations, right? And that there's been somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million deportations, but 1.6 of them were like self-deportations. 1.6 of them were like people were notified and they said, well, just get the fuck out of here. I don't want to be in jail.
Yeah, good.
And then 500,000 of them were, but people are saying very few of them have been violent criminals. But we found out there was like 8%. This is just 8% of what we know has been caught. That is a lot of violent criminals. If you got 500,000 people and 8% of them are murderers and rapists, and they snuck in, not even snuck in, because they were allowed access to the United States over the last 4 years, somewhere to the tune of, let's be like super charitable. Let's say it's only 10 million, because I think it's a lot more. And they don't. A lot
more.
Yeah, they don't really know the number because it's really the numbers that they're giving are based on interactions, right? But how many people snuck through and they didn't have an interaction with them? It's a lot, man. It's a lot of people. And they did this shit on purpose. And they did this shit because they want more congressional seats, because the census doesn't count citizens. It doesn't count legal citizens. It just counts human beings. So the more citizens you have in an area, the more congressional seats you have. And then there's places like California that make it illegal to show your ID. You're not allowed. Not only are you not supposed, which you should have to show your fucking ID when you vote.
Yes.
Right? So we know that you're legally voting. They made it so you can't show your ID, which is the only, you could steel man this to the end of time. The only reason why you do that is because you want to cheat. Of course. It's the only reason.
Of course. Well, it's not just that, but you make a good, compelling point here.
Okay, so first of all, listen to how Joe escalated and got so agitated in that one clip as he justifies all of this. How many steps he works through and how quickly he goes through them. How many different talking points he sort of does a roundup of. This to me sounded like a man scrambling to defend something he's trained himself to know he has to defend, but emotionally cannot justify. You know, this to me is the sound of cognitive dissonance. It's the effect, the cumulative effect of all this rhetoric that we've covered on multiple shows now, way more than I expected to be covering when we started this show, about him swallowing the great replacement theory and this poisoned social media diet. That's where his biases are and where his biases have been trained to be. And yet, I think he can't justify emotionally that from what he's seeing of people being shot. And this is why it kind of comes in that kind of way. When he says 8% of the deportations were violent criminals, and 8% of a large number of people, that's so many people. It's like, right, 8% is still a lot. And he's right that if 8% of any random group of people were violent criminals, that would be a lot. But if the violent criminals represent 8% of the people you've arrested for being violent criminals, it means you've got a miss rate of 92%, and that's the bad thing that we're talking about here. The 8% should be 100%. You're deporting the violent criminals. If only 8% of those people you're deporting as violent criminals are violent criminals, you fucked up a lot.
Yeah. Last clip in our main event. This has a slur against trans people, just letting you know ahead of time.
Part of that whole signal chat that's dangerous that people aren't talking about, that's probably the most dangerous aspect of it. And I can't prove this, but it's been my experience that left-wing communities and left-wing groups, especially online communities and online groups, really pander to the mentally ill in a big way, really pander to them. And I think that it's a form of weaponization. They want to attract the extremely mentally ill into these communities, and it helps with actually what is radicalization. And they play on the fact that they're mentally ill in order to do this.
Well, this is Antifa, right? Like this is why
it's not just Antifa. It goes beyond that.
Sure.
Like, if you go to some of these TikTokers communities, you go to some of the online political pundits communities who are far left, okay? These people who are in there are Fruit Loops, man.
Yeah.
They are lunatics, and they're pandered to. They're pandered to. Oh, okay, you can't say this to them. That's ableist. You can't tell them you're a weirdo because that's mean. You can't. And not only are they pandered to, but I think that that's the source of the weapon. If it's the case that these people don't care about death, they don't care. Like, the outcome's going to be death. That guy who shot at the ICE agents not too long ago. Remember, he was on top of the roof. He was shooting across with, I think, a Mauser rifle, and they dusted him. They killed him, or he shot himself. I don't remember which. But anyway, the interesting thing is, like, they don't care if they die. They're dying martyrs. They don't care. And it's really easy to weaponize mentally ill people that way because they don't care. These are the same people who have the high suicide rates for a reason, because they're already mentally ill, like the Troons and others, which many of them you find are connected to trans people almost every time.
Also SSRIs.
Yep.
So just to be clear, we cut a very short digression there where they talk about the person who's on the ice roof. It wasn't relevant. You can go away and listen to it. 1 hour, 25 minutes or 9. He starts all that by saying, I can't prove this, but it is my experience. And I believe him that he can't prove this. There was a bit that leads into this that was too long to include, but he explains that all these protests have a formula to them. Protesters know that the local police won't protect property, so that's left to ICE and the FBI to protect themselves and their own property. And therefore, Antifa knows that the longer that they're there protesting, the more chance there is of an incident that they can use to their advantage. That's what he's saying. Then it's their own fault for protesting when this happens. It's what they're looking to do. If they were to just let ICE do what ICE want to do, they wouldn't get shot. And that getting protesters shot is the goal of the protest, to create martyrs. And then he leads into this bit. He called that the formula. And you can go away and listen to that in the show. But in this bit, he's now saying that those protests and these protest groups deliberately recruit mentally ill, suicidal people who they can convince to die for the cause. So this is in effect saying the people who get killed at these protests wanted it, or were persuaded that it was fine, or deserved it, or were attracted to the death, or were sent to their death by the protests. Again, at no point are the people who pulled the trigger responsible for what that bullet does and where it goes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marsh, because look at who's kicking these things off. Watch these two confrontations of these murders that happened in the last couple of weeks. It's the police and the Border Patrol. I'm saying police, but you know what I mean. It's the Border Patrol, the ICE agents who are being aggressive. They're the ones who escalate this entire conflict to the murder in both cases, right? In Renee Good's case, you see the person is literally getting ready to murder her as he switches hands with his cell phone so he can have access to his gun as he stands next to her car, and then it might sort of brush him because he leans into it, and then he uses that to justify shooting her 3 times in the face. Same thing happens with Alex Pretti. Alex Pretti stands in between them. They throw him on the ground. They beat him. And then the moment comes that they can shoot him and that they think there's some sort of justifiable way to shoot him. It's not just one person who unloads their gun on him. It's 2 people who unload their gun on him. It's every time the escalation is coming from that side.
Yeah, exactly. And then notice in here, amongst all of this, the leftist protest movements, these extremists or lunatics, they're attracting people who are mentally ill. He then, Andrew Wilson here, goes straight into using a slur for trans people and saying that the higher suicide rate among trans people is the reason they're drawn to protests, and not, for example, that many of those protests are about the rights of trans people. So maybe that's why trans people are drawn to protests for their own civil rights. But using these suicide statistics against a group like trans people is something we've seen done before. There was a conversation we covered where someone was saying, I wouldn't trust a trans pilot because of how high the suicide rate is in trans people. So we have as a society bullied people into having such poor mental health that they have a higher suicidality, and then we blame them for that suicidality and discredit any attempts they make to push for their own rights or to go about their own lives as a result. I think this is disgusting. I think it's genuinely vile. And Joe, we've covered Joe's movement on this over the years. He used to be, look, I don't have anything against trans people. I just worry about men in bathrooms. And now his guest is casually throwing around slurs about trans people, and Joe literally does not bat an eye at it. That's how far we've come here.
Now we're going to move on to our undercard.
And the undercard's banging. The undercard's filled with fights.
So for the undercard this week, we've been curious. We've mentioned on the show multiple times. We're curious as to where Joe is in terms of religious identity and religious belief. Because we know he's mentioned he used to be an atheist. Back in the day, he was an atheist. He thought religion was silly. He thought religious people were silly. But we've been getting a sense that his stance has shifted, certainly over the last couple of years. And in this interview, we actually get to hear how far he's come. And I think that's why it makes for a really interesting undercard.
All right, here's the first clip.
Right.
So here's the self-reported data. From 2022 survey analysis found that 51% of conservatives report excellent mental health compared to 20% of liberals. That's a big difference.
Huge.
It's a giant difference.
I don't think stigma could account for that.
No, it can't. It's like, it's not just stigma. It's also like what does it mean to be conservative? Does it mean, taking account for your own actions, discipline, hard work ethic? All those things are actually good for your mental health. Like pulling yourself up and getting back to work and doing things.
I think now, and I think maybe it always should have been framed this way. I think now for the label of conservative to apply, we really kind of start with religious foundationalism. Mm-hmm. That's what is fast becoming the delineation.
Right. Having a framework.
Having the framework.
Yeah.
Right. And the religious framework is almost instantly going to put you in that, moving towards that conservative camp almost every single time. And I think that that's a necessary component now. If we're trying to make these political delineations, it becomes tough. What's a Republican or a neocon versus a conservative versus this versus that? It comes down to foundationalism of framework, right, like you were just saying, in the framework of Christianity, Christian ethics, huge delineation point between the right and the left, who rejects that for harm principles, utilitarianism, and various other sorts of frameworks.
Yeah, and they'll also point to, what Christianity has done throughout history and the amount of harm that it's caused. But it's kind of like every power structure throughout history you could point to in that way.
Well, it was what was there.
So what Andrew is describing here is Christian nationalism.
Yes.
It's tying your party and your politics to your religion and then making that link absolute. You can't be religious without being conservative. You can't be conservative without being religious, and both of which are imperative to have a moral framework for a good life. He's arguing for theocracy through the back door, essentially. You're not voting for the religion, you're voting conservative, which I have defined as inherently based in religion, and my version of religion in particular. And from where Joe was, we're now in a place where Joe not only accepts that, but adds to it. And yeah, he's bringing up all the bad that Christianity has done through history, but he's only bringing that up to rebuff those things. Now, I think him saying that, that's what he would have said a few years ago when he was an atheist. He'd have talked about the bad that Christianity has done throughout history. He's bringing it up here to say, but actually that's nothing to do with religion at all. So this is a sign of Joe's shift.
He's also, in the past things that we've listened to, used religion as a way to look at some other topic to make it seem absurd. He'll say, well, they think about it like religion. They're using it as a religious thing. Look at how religious they are about this sort of thing. He'll use it as a way to make things seem more absurd than they actually are. And so that happens with him a lot before. I don't know if he's going to keep using that metaphor in the future. I'm not sure that he's going to keep doing that. I want to point out just really quickly his language here and how he defines what a conservative is. Taking account for your own actions, discipline, hard work ethic. I don't think those are necessarily conservative ideals, right? That's what he's saying is conservative ideals. First off, taking responsibility for your actions. Take a look at this current administration and tell me a single time they've taken responsibility for
Take a look at the first half of this show. It's an exercise in not taking responsibility for actions.
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to say, what does that mean about the other side then? You have to take the opposite, right? Because he's saying these things are diametrically opposed. Well, what is the opposite? They don't have a work ethic. They're not the type of people who are taking responsibility for their actions. They have no discipline. He's making that backhanded way to insult the other side by saying this side only has sort of positive qualities. Okay, so this is a straight cut right into the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, the Catholic Church gets a lot of shit for this. Well, look at all the horrible things that the Catholic Church did. And it's like, well, the Catholic Church was the whole known world once.
Right.
All of Europe was the Catholic Church.
Right.
Not, like all of it was.
Right.
You can't have organizations which span whole nations and countries, ethnicities, cultures, integrate themselves into it and not have corruption. That I don't care what system it is. pointing to it and saying it's because they were Catholic, that's where it becomes absurd.
Right.
They were corrupt. There was corruption. But
Because
that's
they're
not
human.
Because they're human, not because
Right.
they're Catholic.
Right.
So again, look at where Joe is in agreeing with this. What these two guys are currently saying is, well, if religion does bad, it's not because religion is bad. It's because religion's done by people and people are human and humans do bad. But if religion does good, well, that's because religion is good. It's a positive framework for living your life. That's the only moral framework to live life. So this is essentially a no true Scotsman fallacy. No truly religious person could do something immoral. Therefore, anything that's immoral that happens is not the fault of religion. It's the fault of the person. The religion is always good. This is where we're framing it here.
And they're talking about very specifically, well, these people were bad in the Catholic Church. Well, the Catholic Church is the power structure they're using to inflict that damage on those people, right? So that wouldn't exist if the Catholic Church wasn't the power structure that we were using. You could say the same thing about capitalism. You could say the same thing about all these other power structures that exist that hurt other people. It's just not a good way to frame it, because now you're trying to exonerate the Catholic Church because in the sense that you're saying that it's not their fault. Well, that's the system they use to oppress those people.
Yeah, it wasn't the church's fault. I think the church had like a Bible that misfired at some point, and that's kind of why all the bad happened. That particular version of the Bible is very prone to misfiring. They don't use it anymore for that reason.
Moves. You got to be careful with the bookmark. That's the key, that cloth bookmark. All right. Next up, this is talking about Joe and his religion.
One of the things that I always try to point out to people, they go, why do you go to church? Like, because when I was younger, I was very cynical about religion. And then I've got older. One of the things that I always say is, if there was a pill that could make you as nice as the people that I go to church with, everybody would be on it.
Yeah.
They are the nicest fucking people you will ever encounter. When we leave the church
nice,
parking lot,
kind?
They're kind.
Yeah, they're kind.
Kind and nice. They're all the above. They're like very friendly, happy people. But when you leave the church parking lot, or even when you're entering, they're everybody lets everybody in. It's like no one rushes ahead. It's like you go ahead and then you go ahead. It's like the most self-organized, most charitable way of exiting a parking lot I've ever experienced in my life. The opposite of a concert. You go to a great concert, everybody's like fucking on everybody's bumper, trying to weasel in. People are honking, fuck you. In church, it's like one person goes, and another person goes, no, you go, wave, and then everybody's fine and everybody's happy. It's like, if you could take a pill that could do that to you, if therapy could do that to you, we should all be on therapy. We should all take that pill.
Philosophy can do that for you.
Okay, yeah, maybe you should be in therapy, to be honest, if that's what you need. I think people should be in therapy. Go to therapy, Joe. It sounds kind of reasonable.
Go to therapy. Also, these are people in your tribe, and they're being nice to other people in their tribe. So what? Everyone is pretty much nice to people in their tribe. Now go outside of their tribe and see if that carries over. Go outside and see how they're voting. How is their vote being carried over? How is that maybe inflicting damage on other people? The thing is like, if I surround myself with people who often reach outside their tribe to help other people, right? To do good things outside of their tribe. These people are smiling at you and letting you in at church. That is not an indication on whether or not they're good people or they're nice people. They're just nice to people who also believe and are involved in the same structures that they are.
Yeah, exactly. Scientologists are normally pretty nice to other Scientologists, I imagine. You know? Joe is just amazed that people can be polite and kind. And I don't know if that's because he spends the rest of his time at his personal comedy cult club with all the other crabs in a bucket where maybe kindness and politeness isn't the norm. But he's changed his whole, we're led to believe he's changed his whole worldview about the very structure and nature of reality because someone let him out at a junction, because someone gave him right of way in a car at one point. He's like parked his way into Christianity. But as you say, now let's look at how Christians in America are responding to the ICE killings.
Right.
And say how kind and nice people are to people who aren't in their tribe.
Yeah. Okay, so again, Joe is talking about how he's religious now.
It's definitely a better framework for living your life. And There's a lot of people that just reject that think of themselves as intelligent. They think of themselves as intelligent and well-read and educated.
I'm
and
too
they just
smart
think
for that.
Yeah, I'm too smart for that.
I'm too smart for all that.
I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
Any atheist needs to take 8 grams of mushrooms. Just
do a little DMT.
do a little DMT, and you're like, oh, I don't know anything. You think you know things. You don't know a fucking thing. You just know what you've experienced. And I think that the world is better off if people have a great moral and ethical framework. I think morals and ethics and being kind is one of the most important values that human beings can ever possess if you want to live in a productive and healthy community.
Completely agree. And I think that kindness, I make a delineation between kindness and niceness, because I think it's often kind not to be nice.
Right.
But I do think that you can be nice and it may not be kind.
Right.
And so
that's true.
So I make a delineation between those things. I don't think that kindness, though, has much variance. Kindness is looking after the interest of somebody who's not me.
So I think this is pretty unambiguous at this point. Joe is no longer an atheist. In fact, he has contempt for atheists.
Yeah.
And he very clearly is now religious. That's where we are now.
Yeah, you're not wrong. At the end, he says, kindness is looking after the interest of somebody who's not me. Okay, so in this entire episode, we're talking about someone, Alex Pretti, who was looking after the interest of that person who was thrown down on the ground. And you have called him an agitator. You've talked about him as somebody who's breaking the law, who should know better, who's basically antagonizing the police, who's aggressively going after them. You've made these claims about this person. That literally goes in the face of what you just said here. Like, kindness is looking after the interest of someone who's not me.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's a very small thing to point out, but he's saying, well, atheists, they think they're so smart for not having an active belief in a God, which is all an atheist is. Do you believe in a God? No, I don't believe in a God. Doesn't necessarily mean that you don't think you know for certain there isn't a God, but you have no active belief in a God. But he's saying, well, atheists take some mushrooms and realize you don't know anything, ... Therefore, you should believe in this very specific deity that I found in a book and believe that that is literally true and is definite truth about the world. It doesn't hold. It doesn't hold at all.
All right, last clip. They're talking about Christianity and forgiveness.
Not only that, but I think there is a natural default in the human mind to be attracted to a structure. And if that structure is a Christian structure, you're attracted to all the Christian values that we've just discussed being so positive and beneficial to you. But if you're not, and you go to a leftist progressive structure, leftists in particular, like a Marxist structure, what you're seeing is a complete lack of forgiveness. They don't have that built into the system. One of the beautiful things about Christianity is forgiveness. And the recognition that we're all sinners and we all fuck up and we're all human and we're all flawed, and that you could move on and be better, and you can atone for these sins, and you could recognize that, yes, you've made a mistake, but here's the best way to move forward and be a better person. Society at a whole recognizes that you are me and I am you, and we're all kind of the same thing. We all fuck up, and we're all just human beings, but there's a pathway. It's a pathway to forgiveness. There's zero pathway in leftism. That's the most horrible thing when you watch these pile-ons online over like the most innocuous discretions.
What's funny with leftists is their pathway is just everything's permitted.
Yeah.
And the pathway from the Christian is no, not everything is permitted, but almost everything can be forgiven.
Right.
And that I would see as the big distinction.
Okay, this is just a lie. It's just a giant lie that they keep on talking about over and over and over again. I've seen people on the left forgive so many people, but you actually have to be contrite and try to do better. Those are important pieces of actual forgiveness, not just looking up at the sky and being like, forgive me. It's actually going to the aggrieved party, saying you're sorry, trying to do better. All those things are really important for forgiveness. And that happens literally all the time. I think what happened with Joe is people probably called him out. He didn't try to do better, and now he's mad about it. I think that's really what happened.
Yeah, exactly. And I've made this point before as well. when Joe, and I think he also got this from Mark Andreessen, there was a conversation we covered the first time he talked about, Mark Andreessen was talking about how people get exiled from wokeism. It's like being forced out of your community in the medieval times or something. When he talks about the left not forgiving you, he means for the things that you've said and done. And he's wrong. Like, you can be forgiven for the things that you've done if you're contrite about it, but that's what he means. But meanwhile, religions might offer forgiveness for things that you say and do, but never for who you are.
Yeah.
You know, there is no forgiveness in religion for being gay or bi or trans unless you say you've stopped being those things.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you don't change those things about who you are, you will be exiled from your family and exiled from your community and your church and things. Lots of our listeners will no doubt have experienced that. That's how they'll have ended up atheists in a lot of places. Religions might forgive Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan isn't inherently anything religions would be disgusted by.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up with that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you very much. You're a beautiful person.
All right. Marsh, here we are. End of the show. Something good.
So, yes, at 2 hours, 33 minutes into a 2 hour, 40-minute podcast, Andrew Wilson says, "It's my privilege to have fans. It's not their privilege to be one." And I agree with that sentiment entirely. I think it's a privilege to have fans and followers. It's not a privilege for someone to be your fan or someone to follow your work. That's the direction of appreciation and gratitude. That's where it should be. I think it's a privilege for us to have listeners and us to have fans.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the important thing to me. That is the first and only thing that this guy said that I agreed with or I thought had any value, and it came 7 minutes towards the end of a 2 hour and 40-minute show. And you're not even going to offer anything.
You can close the show, Marsh.
I'll do that. So that is it for the show this week. Remember that you can access more than half an hour, probably way more than half an hour of bonus content this particular week for as little as $1 an episode. Just subscribe at patreon.com/No Rogan. You're also there going to get an ad-free version of this show and every show, in fact. You can also hear more from Cecil at Cognitive Dissonance and Citation Needed. And you can hear more from me at the Skeptics with a K podcast and the Skeptic podcast. And we will see you next week for a little more of the No Rogan experience.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron, or check out the show notes, go to norogan.com. KNOWROGAN.com.